Let me ask you this: how have you managed to continue finding meaning and fulfillment when all the metrics that you would normally judge a successful endeavor by don't apply to like the podcast world? Because the things we know to be true, it's like, oh, you have to have 1 million people, or you have to have like, all these listeners, but still finding value and relevance for yourself in helping like one person. Like if your podcast you do like saves one person or gives one person perspective or just a slight reprieve from the shitty life they're living. Like, how do you remind yourself of that to keep going?
I think it's with the help of other people reminding me. Like, I really love when people are able to message me and tell me like, hey, that impacted me, or said, hey, my brother-in-law was on your podcast and like our family appreciates you for allowing that time for him to speak. This was so fucking wild. I'm going to tell you this story because it literally happened yesterday. I got a message from a girl my ex-boyfriend cheated on me with. And she writes me on the podcast, and she was one of the people that had told me about him cheating. And she says, hey, you had my boyfriend's brother-in-law on the podcast, and I just wanted to tell you thank you for having him on and sharing the story. And I was like, holy fuck. Like, is that a shitty part of life that comes up? Absolutely. But like, I am so happy that I'm continuing to do this because I know that story meant something for him, and he's still talking about it, and having people reach out to me and say, like, I got my child into therapy because of something that you said on the podcast. Like, those things, those interactions with me is like, that's why I keep fucking doing it. That is why I keep doing the hard things. Like, and it is something that I have to remind myself of. It's something that I don't look at the analytics all the time. I don't give a shit. Like, I literally don't. It's just like, studies, like statistics. It's like, cool. You're only talking about those certain people in the statistics. What about everybody else? What is actually further beyond the numbers? What are the feelings? What are the emotions? Like, that's the part that the world has forgotten about. And they're like, well, what about the statistics? I'm like, I don't give a fuck. What about this story? What about this person? What's actually happening? You could make whatever study you want. You can make whatever results you want. But what's actually fucking happening?
Man, I had a excuse me. I have a dear friend. This guy Jerry, years ago, training jujitsu with him, and jujitsu for me is a lot. It's a lot of me for a lot
You're
of
a freaking
reasons.
black belt. Let's talk about that. Throw that
Yeah,
out there.
but it's not. I was telling somebody yesterday. It's like it's a spiritual thing for me. It's not my competence, and yes, my competence is there. It's like if you want to learn jujitsu, I am the most important person. I have what you want to know, right? And like, where else in the world is that, right? Like, who are you going to run into in the street? They're like, oh my God, Mackenzie, you have exactly what I need. Like, in not an inappropriate way. Like you have, like, please teach me. Like, what is that thing? Very few people have something that another human being would be like, you know something I need to know. And I know it's going to take years and it's going to be really hard. Can you please teach me? And so for me, I take that very, very seriously. And there aren't many places where the average person has that kind of value. When I stopped teaching, it threw me into probably one of the darkest periods of my entire adult life, because all I had been doing was helping kids get into college and doing SAT prep from the week I graduated college until about 2 years ago.
Wow.
Right. So it's just disappeared. It's like, well, what are you? You had this value. You had these people that would come to you. You had this thing to offer the world, and now that's gone. And so years ago, this guy Jerry, who we're training with, he's an older guy, and he was like in his mid 40s, and I was 30 at the time, or somewhere around there. And we go out to get a beer. A bunch of guys training. We go out to get a beer after training, and I was like, Jerry, you married? I don't really know him. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, you happy? And he's like, no. I was like, oh shit, because like that was just like my standard joke. I'm like, you happy? He's like, oh yeah, my wife's pain. He's like, no. I was like, oh fuck.
You're like, what do I do now?
Okay, like, where do you follow up? It's like 8:30 at night. You just got done training. You got a beer in your hand, and you realize like, oh shit. So Jerry is in the midst of a divorce. I find out He's got 3 girls, and they're wonderful. And I realized after leaving that, I'm like, this is a guy at the end, because the probability of somebody committing suicide, a man in particular, they're getting divorced after like 10 years. They're losing their kids. They're losing, and again, I'm not here to get into the dynamics of divorce agreements,
Right.
but in general, they're losing half to 60 or 70% of the things they worked for. And of course, the counterpoint's like, okay, but his wife was at home working with
Right.
kids. Fine.
Right.
But that throws a lot of people into such a tailspin that it's the end.